Welcome
Hello.
back to the Good Karma Podcast, the podcast that delves deep into the intricate world of mental health and its connection to fields ranging from sociology all the way to philosophy. I'm your host, Jackson Kang, and today I'm joined by Dr. Anthony Pantaleno and Dr. Barbara Fisher. First off, hi, Dr. Pantaleno and Dr. Fisher. I want to thank
Hello.
you so much for joining me on the Good Karma Podcast. I think that you all will be able to provide some very deep insight into how students can practice mental wellness, given your backgrounds as former school therapists and as recent or upcomingly recent published authors. Without further ado, could you please introduce yourselves to the audience?
Sure. First of all, we want to both thank you for hosting the podcast and also for recognizing at a young age the importance of mental health. Many people in older generations really didn't give it the attention that we do now. They certainly took care of their physical health. They saw their doctors. They went to gyms. But the importance of mental health is the message that you're carrying, and we appreciate that. Um, I guess I'll start by saying we both began our careers as school psychologists, and then along the way, we began to work as outpatient therapists and opened our own practices. Um, the bottom line is that, whether we were working in a school setting or in an office setting, particularly in the last few years, we've seen how things have changed, how much people have struggled. So we're going to take the time today to, as you said, delve into that and try and give people some things to think about when we're finished. When I'm away from the office, I am an avid fan of British um, British import rock. I'm a child of the 60s and the 70s. And my other obsession is anything Tolkien, anything Lord of the Rings. And when I'm not doing those things, I have my wife and three young adult daughters and spend as much time with them as I can whenever we can at the beach. And also playing my guitar and waiting to be discovered by a famous music producer so I can make $1 million and go on TV.
Great to hear. Thank you for that. I too wish to one day learn the guitar, but unfortunately, it has not happened so far. But thank you for
You can
introducing.
do it. You can do it.
I still have time. I've only reached the ripe old age of 17.
Well, I'd like to thank you as well, Jackson. It's hard to believe when you say the ripe old age of 17 when you're doing what you're doing. So much good. And as Tony said, we appreciate so much that you are taking the time and energy and lending your expertise to, such an important topic for everybody. Um, Emotional and mental health, as we all know, is not a luxury, and it's something that we all need to really pay attention to in the same way that we do our physical health. So we really are grateful to you for trying to, help us get the word out. I also live on Long Island and work here. My husband and I have raised our three children here. And I also have a large extended family, and I spend a lot of my time with my family. When I have any spare time, which doesn't seem to be too often these days, but I definitely am a lover of nature. I love to be anywhere in nature, and I love taking walks and listening to all kinds of music, gardening when I can. And as I always say, when I'm very stressed, my therapy is baking. And I enjoy that very much. So
Thank you
thanks
so
again
much.
for having us.
Okay, so let's start with our first question, shall we? So, what are some memorable moments or experiences from your time working as a school psychologist?
I started my career in 1978 and I retired in 2015. And much of the day in a school psychologist's life is caught up with assessment, doing eligibility determination for special services, providing counseling, working with teachers and parents. But without doubt, the most memorable part of my career was being able to start a peer helping program called Natural Helpers. Natural Helpers started back in 1979, state of Washington. And what it does is it seeks the leaders within each school, not just the traditional leaders, academic leaders, athletic leaders. It seeks the leaders in all of the subgroup cultures within a school. And it takes them on a 3-day retreat. So we would always go to Camp Alvernia in Centerport. There would be about 60 students, 9th through 12th grade, with about 15 or so adult staff, mostly mental health staff. And the focus was on teaching them facilitative listening skills, how to be a better listener when they had a friend in crisis. And then either their role would just be to be a better listener, or if there was something more serious that they were picking up, they were trained to use the mental health team in the school to make referrals and to get their friends the help that they needed. They also learned excellent mental health self-care. So it was a very special program. It's still very active on Long Island. And there's also many high schools across the country that run Natural Helpers. I would have to say that's my fondest memory.
That's great. I think that that's such a great way to kind of foster like community interconnectedness, because I would say that in today's age, that is one of the main things that's probably missing, as opposed in the past is kind of just regular open communication. Like I feel like that the topic of mental health is not widely discussed. And so I think that by facilitating more or improving on one's ability to listen to others and kind of facilitating these conversations, it kind of opens up um, a space where youth can really talk about problems and mental wellness. And I think that that's great. So, in your opinion, what are the most pressing issues facing students today, and how do they impact their mental health?
I think the issues that teens and young adults face these days are very similar to issues that have always been there. Loneliness, dealing with bullying, just not feeling good about themselves, body image issues, sometimes, using substances. These are all common issues that come up. And I think these days it's more challenging than ever because all of that is superimposed on this very difficult and complicated world that we're living in right now.
Mhm.
Um, whether we talk about the politics, the environment, different health challenges, it's just really difficult. And, teenage brains are developing for many years. After even reaching the 20, and it's a lot to process. And I couldn't agree more with what both of you were just saying about connection being a real missing piece these days, because in some ways we're more connected by all of our technology, but at the same time we're very distracted. And that really gets in the way of true connection.
Yeah, I think that really ever since the pandemic, like, I've seen personally, like my attention span has definitely taken a hit because there's just so many distractions from social media and just digital media in general. And so I've been trying to kind of limit my screen time ever since then. but it's definitely a pressing issue that I see a lot of my friends and a lot of my peers dealing with. And so just curious, you must have treated a good number of young adults like me during your time. And so what is slash are some of the most recurring issues that you've seen and possibly still see during your years of experience?
Barb actually touched on some of those,
Mhm.
and I think the best answer I can give you is, instead of thinking of recurring issues, remember that adolescents are adolescents. Adolescents in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they're growing. And if you think about the three areas of your school life, middle school, middle school is a fun time. It's making sure you're cool. It's making sure you don't stand out from the crowd too much. No, nobody wants to be that loner sitting alone at the lunch table. And then you evolve into high school, you're a little older. Now you have to figure some things out. You know, you still want to be cool, you still want to have fun, but you have to figure out a little bit more about what makes you tick. And that's the job of high school students. In college, and again, you're going to be heading there shortly. I'm sure you've already started to hear, long before now, the discussion of what are you going to major in? Where are you going? What are you going to do? So the college years are now about getting a little bit more serious in terms of possible careers, in terms of possible long-term partners, and you're starting to launch. So across the span of all those years, many of the same issues are going to come up. They may look different in different decades, but from a developmental point of view, we're all trying to get to the same place. We want to be happy. We want to know where we're going. We want to know we're going to make it.
I think that's a really profound answer. I think that naturally across generations, um, you are going to see a lot of changes just because the world changes, like people change, society changes in general. But I think that there are a lot of the same problems kind of plaguing the same, I guess, areas of development um, in our youth that like you definitely can see general themes and patterns and trends definitely occurring across these generations. And that segues actually really well into the next question, where really ever since World War II, mid 20th century, all the statistics and numbers really point to a really dramatic rise, I would say, in mental health issues in young adults. And what do you think are kind of the main factors here that have led to this rise over time?
That's a great question. There are so many factors, I think, which contribute to um, this alarming rise that we're seeing in mental health problems. And interestingly, I think one of the contributing factors is actually a good thing, which is that we talk about issues more. We talk about mental health. There's much more transparency and openness. I can't help but think about Simone Biles and, the gymnastics and how incredibly courageous she is, and what she's done really for so many young people by being willing to share her story. The other side of that is, with more openness and more transparency, more people are willing to get help. And so that does contribute, I think, to somewhat to the numbers rising. Also, with social media and lots of information out there, I do think that some people are self-diagnosing more. That may be accurate or not. Um, but in addition to that, there are more and more medications available. So people may be coming forward because they think that they can get symptom relief, right? Which again is a good thing. But we still keep coming back to the same theme, which is that we're living in a difficult world, which is it's full of, you know, difficult issues that young people are facing. And I truly think that, you know, as people are more isolated, less connected, they have less support, that does contribute to the problem. And as you said, Jackson, I think, you know, since the pandemic, since that intensified all of this, we did see a really tremendous rise in mental health issues.
Definitely. I feel like that it's kind of ironic because the whole idea of social media is to kind of connect people across the world and to
Right.
make just society in general more interconnected. But I feel like that there's a layer of authenticity that is lost in social media. And so it really just facilitates this toxic environment, which I think really exacerbates a lot of the mental health problems that
Mhm.
are plaguing like the youth and just society in general. And it's actually kind of interesting because in a previous podcast, I was actually talking to a therapist who mentioned that sometimes she has clients who go in and try to fact check and compare some things that they saw on like TikTok or Instagram.
Mhm.
Um, and she's like, sometimes it's great advice. And I say to them, you should practice that. And sometimes it's just completely off the mark.
Right.
And so it's really just a mixed bag. And it's really hard to, in my opinion, judge social media accurately or give it just a single evaluation because it's so multifaceted. So I know that you have a background in insight meditation and you are going to release a book called Best Therapy for Teens to 20 Somethings, A Parent's Guide to Finding Mental Health Support, which elucidates solutions to and the complexities around mental health in young adults. Could you give us a bit of an overview on the content and highlights of this upcoming book?
Sure. Hard to believe that we actually started this project almost to the day about 3 years ago.
Wow.
And we were well into the pandemic at that point,
Mhm.
and we saw right away that some young people transitioned, as difficult as it was. They adapted to distance learning. They got used to, after the first couple of weeks of sleeping in late and being in their pajamas all day, they got used to what that kind of a life was going to be like. Um, and yet we also know that there were many young people that in that environment just crashed and burned. And so what began to happen was parents did their job. They got on the phones, they got into their contacts, and they started calling therapists. But for the first time in our country's history, what happened was that the number of young people seeking help far, far, far surpassed the number of therapists that were out there. So on a typical day, a parent might call, ask if we were taking new clients. By the way, we use the term clients as opposed to patients because patient implies some sort of a medical, organic type of an illness. And we don't view mental health in that way, although we recognize there is certainly a neurobiological component. But we're people. And so when we talk to people and use the term clients, it's just saying to them, you know, you're us. We're not the doctor, even though that may be our title. You're the individual with a problem, we're going to collaborate with you. But as parents started to make those phone calls, they often found that there wasn't anyone with an opening. Or if someone had an opening, they would be on a waiting list for 2 months. How terrible did it feel to take those phone calls if a young person was perhaps in a suicidal crisis?
Yeah, that really was part of the motivation, for writing the book, to give parents an overview of the process, so that we could maybe break it down and make some of it more understandable and make it a little bit easier to navigate so more people could wind up in our office. Because the reality is that we can only help the people who can show up in the office, right?
Mhm.
So the second part of our book, we talk about some of the different types of therapy and what are some of the most common things that bring people into therapy. And, I think one of the most important messages, as Tony said, is just the message of hope that there is a therapist out there, even though it's been really difficult trying to find one, and that it's a process of collaboration, and that we can work together to find support and help.
I think that by having or writing this book that you are releasing in upcoming August, I think that it will really help a lot of parents out there, and I think that's great. So
You hope so.
yeah, thank you.
Yes.
So I know that in your book, one of the main talking points is the issue of the frustratingly complex healthcare system, such as the treat to target strategy. Could you expand a bit more on why this healthcare system is so complex and some other possible avenues that parents can take to maneuver around these complexities?
Yes. The healthcare industry in this country is driven by insurance,
Mhm.
and mental health care, we would like to think, is part of that insurance. And many families, through their jobs, and many individuals have healthcare coverage built into their overall insurance plan. But when people are looking for therapists for the first time, they are often very surprised to find that they don't either have healthcare coverage, mental health care coverage, or they have very limited coverage. And if you have a young child or young adult with a problem that may require something more than a few sessions, it can get quite complicated. The other issue is that many providers over the years have left insurance company panels. Back when I started back in 1978, the measure of your success as a mental health professional was how many insurance panels you were a member of. And what happened over many years is that insurance companies started to reduce reimbursements rates to providers. And at first, it was just a trickle, but then it became a gushing river where therapists left insurance panels. And so now when a family would call, again, even if they have coverage, they may not find somebody who's in their plan. An interesting kind of a sidelight to this is I'm finding that many new professionals, young psychologists, young social workers, they don't even want to go anywhere near insurance companies
Mhm.
because you have to abide by many restrictions. And let's not forget the insurance company's business.
Mhm.
Their interest is the bottom line, saving money.
Mhm.
That doesn't square too well with best practices in healthcare or mental health. So you can see it's a perfect storm.
And even when the insurance, that people have insurance, for mental health, the problem is their insurance may dictate they can only have a certain number of sessions and a minimal number at that. So, there's lots of obstacles, unfortunately, um, when it comes to using insurance and really getting the help that someone needs, not the help that's prescribed by the insurance company.
And since we started writing the book, I would say the last year, we've spent a good deal of our time trying to brainstorm resources outside of the traditional psychotherapy system. Because let's face it, many people don't have insurance at all.
Mhm. Yeah.
And what do you do if you have an adolescent, a young adult who's depressed or anxious or afraid to go to school, or is experiencing some obsessive compulsive issues or eating disorders or so many things? They need support. And if you can't turn to the traditional insurance-based systems, as a parent, that doesn't mean you can stop the search. So we spent the last year trying to compile resources, for example, through school districts, community agencies, private agencies that may provide support, even though it's not traditional psychotherapy per se.
I can kind of relate to that on a more personal level because my oldest brother, he actually had ADHD slash ADD when he was younger. Thankfully, it's gotten much better since then. But we really, or my family really found a solution, and that was transcendental meditation, which is an alternative. I would say it would be classified under that
Yeah.
alternative psychotherapy avenue. And it was very it was a very tough time in my parents before for my parents and my family overall before we found transcendental meditation because my brother, he was kind of just going from one therapist to another, kind of hopping around, and it was a very tough
Mm.
time. And I think that the more alternative ways that we can disseminate other possible mental wellness techniques that could possibly work, I think the better, because I know that my family could have definitely used uh, a source of information like that when they were searching for a possible solution to my brother's ADHD. So definitely,
That was a good
Yeah.
find. That was
yeah,
a really good find.
yeah.
And it's
So
so good that your family, persevered and didn't give up because a lot of times, like not everything works the same for everyone.
yeah,
And
very
things
true.
change, as we said before. And, there are always possibilities out there. But it's just so great that your parents were open, to
Yeah,
the idea that just because one thing doesn't work, we don't have to give up. And that's
yeah.
really a strong message in our book that, we want people to take away.
And so I know that another crucial talking point in your book is the idea of a disconnect between parents and young adults when regarding mental health. And so, what do you think are some ways that parents can sort of bridge this gap?
Now, I think that, this is definitely a question that's kind of, um, dear to our hearts because one of the most important things we can do as parents is really to help provide the support and to do so at an earlier age if possible, because we know, it can be life-changing when things are addressed, early on. And sometimes it's not easy for parents to get their children on board. And I think it's very important as a parent to really listen and hear the concerns. Like, what are the thoughts that are getting in the way, right? What are the fears? What are the concerns? What are the things that feel like obstacles? And to validate those concerns because they're real. And it's not helpful to just, dismiss them.
Yeah.
Getting to know what is important, and what would be something that would be seen as helpful is motivating. So, for example, just to kind of clarify that, if, let's say, a teenager is having difficulty socializing, and that's like a real source of, anxiety and frustration, then making that connection between getting help from a therapist, getting support, learning how to deal with these challenges socially, that's what I think helps to bridge that gap, to motivate young people to get on board. And also, another point that we kind of emphasize is that it's much more helpful for parents not to isolate the child as the client or the patient, but to, really emphasize that as a family, right, we can make this better. Problems don't exist in a vacuum or in isolation. We're part of a bigger system, and not only part of the family, we're part of the community, we're part of the culture. And so we really try to emphasize, the idea that we're not trying to blame or point out that one person is broken or failing, right? But to just kind of work together to make things better.
Definitely. I actually really like that idea that kind of the health of an individual person really affects like the health of larger social groups. I think that that is definitely an idea that I've seen firsthand because when my brother he was suffering from his ADHD, there was definitely a ripple effect of that in my family, and kind of vice versa, where once he improved, um, I felt
Mm.
that my whole family became happier as a whole. And so I love that idea of it's really a group effort, I feel like, because if one person is suffering, um, and there are many people suffering, um, I really do think that the whole society or country as a whole really does suffer. Um,
You're right, Jackson, that it works both ways. It's a really good point that not only does the health of the family affect the individual, right?
yeah.
But the health of the individual also has that ripple effect with the family and the larger community.
And so, kind of tracing back to a previous point that you mentioned that it's also like I feel like that it is also kind of frowned upon to get a therapist, and for there's really a stigma around therapy and mental health in general. And so, how do you think that therapists can demystify this idea of a stigma around therapy to
Mm.
both parents and young adults?
Well, most importantly, Tony talked about this earlier. We look at this as a collaborative process, that we are humans as well. And having challenges does not and should not define who we are. And that's really, I think, the bottom line that helps to destigmatize the idea of therapy. Um, you know, Looking at people as humans who are struggling rather than, as we said before, patients with some sort of a disease. And when we, as therapists, validate the strengths also that our clients have, and try to show them the respect and acknowledge their wisdom as well, we can do a much better job. So, we view this as a support system that we could all benefit from. You do not need a mental health diagnosis to benefit from therapy.
And so I know I touched upon the idea of meditation earlier, but I know that you both practice and teach mindfulness meditation. So could you tell us a bit more about what mindfulness meditation is?
That's a long story, but we'll give you the short version.
Okay.
We were both practicing psychologists for many years, and I think came to a point where we were looking for something more for ourselves and also for the people that we work with. So Barbara and myself, two of our other colleagues, took a training course to teach mindfulness. And although there are many different forms of meditation in the world, you mentioned TM, mindfulness meditation, which comes from the insight meditation from the Buddhist tradition. All types of meditation really have the same focus. We learned to teach mindfulness, so we teach mindfulness. I wouldn't presume to teach someone TM because I'm not trained to do that. But in any of these traditions, you begin with the recognition that your mind is constantly wandering. And the first task in any meditative learning is learning how to settle your mind, how to quiet your mind. And even as you're trying to do that, you'll be distracted. So it sounds easy, but it's not as easy as it sounds sometimes. But once you've developed some ability to do that, you develop this ability to almost step back from your day-to-day experience and observe it. You don't get caught up in it. You take a step back and you observe it. And a big part of continuing work in mindfulness is acceptance. Learning that whatever's coming your way, it's coming. And although you may not be able to change the events that may show up tomorrow, you do have the ability to choose how you're going to react to them. And mindfulness and all contemplative practice is about teaching you to be able to respond in a situation instead of having the knee-jerk reaction that many of us have when we're confronted with stress. And as you continue to study these traditions, they take you in a direction towards a more spiritual side of yourself. And we can talk about that maybe a little bit later. But that's the core of mindfulness. It's getting your attention to the place where you want it to go instead of having it run around like a wild horse.
I can somewhat relate to that as a TM practitioner. While I would say that the forms of meditation are decent or noticeably different, I do feel like at the core, it is really separating yourself from the moment and kind of looking at your situation from, I don't really know how to put this. Or I think you put it well when you said to not get caught up in the moment. Because whenever I do TM, it's almost like I always imagine like an ocean wave, like waving over the beach of my mind, where it's kind of just wiping away all the superficial day-to-day thoughts that are plaguing or troubling me. And just kind of starting out with a blank slate and then going back into my day-to-day activities. Um, so I think you made some really great points there. So do you think that meditation in general, it could be mindfulness or transcendental meditation, do you think that they would be able to work in conjunction with or perhaps enhance modern therapy?
Yeah, I think that we have found that it's been a tremendous help, for a lot of the people we work with. So it's not instead, it's just in addition. Um, I can still remember the first workshop that I attended on mindfulness, just, not really going intentionally because I was seeking it out, but it sounded interesting. And I remember thinking, wow, this is really like a missing piece of the puzzle, because it was the first time that I considered the idea that instead of trying to change thoughts and, maybe um, adapt your thoughts to be more healthy and helpful and rational, that there was another approach here, which was to change the way that you actually relate to your thoughts. That, maybe all this time believing our thoughts, now we've created, as you mentioned the word separation, Jackson, and it kind of makes me think about how you can separate from your thoughts. How you can take a step back and become an observer and actually see how the stories that play out in your mind affect your behavior and your habits. So it was then that I started becoming interested in exploring this further, which eventually led to, the training that we both pursued in mindfulness. And yeah, I think the short answer is that it's been a really helpful piece of what we do.
When we give professional talks about this topic, there's a slide that we always pull up, which is the number of controlled studies, I should say, peer-reviewed research studies on mindfulness alone. And in the early 80s, you look at the graph and you see immediately there were no peer-reviewed studies. And then if you follow the trends through the 90s and all the way up to where we are now, I think we're upwards of about 16 or 1700 peer-reviewed research studies every year. So there's been an explosion in the interest in this area. And we're people of fads. And I think early on, when we were studying this, everybody was wondering, is this going to be a fad and it'll be around for a year or two and everybody will be doing it and then it'll be replaced by something else. And since the early 80s, now we can safely say that this is just good healthcare.
Yeah.
And it's not going anywhere.
So for our last question, if you were to go back and I guess if there was a hypothetical time machine, let's say, you're able to go back to the time when you're 18 and give advice to your 18-year-old selves, what would it be?
Uh, I think, honestly speaking, I grew up in Brooklyn. I was raised Catholic, big Italian family, religious holidays, traditions. And so it was just kind of hardwired into the system. But then, like many young people in my early 20s, I drifted and it didn't seem relevant anymore. Only to come back, 20 years later in my 40s and 50s and realize that there was something missing that I had always had right under my nose. So if I was talking to my 18-year-old self today, I would say, maybe don't be so quick to step away from the spiritual side of who I was. And even if I didn't practice all the religious traditions in the same way in my 20s and 30s, that spiritual side ultimately became the direction that I've been living in the past for the past 20 years.
I think that's pretty inspiring. All right. So I think that about wraps up all the questions. I think that this conversation was very, very productive. And I think that anybody who listens to this will definitely have some great takeaways. Thank you so
Okay,
much, Dr. Pantaleno and Dr.
you're
Fisher.
welcome. You
You're
have a good day.
welcome, Jackson.
too.
Enjoy your weekend.
This podcast is sponsored by the Mind Matter Foundation, a nonprofit committed to making the world a better place, one mind at a time. The Mind Matter Foundation is committed to funding several local community initiatives that will help foster mental wellness in all people. If you wish to donate to the Mind Matter Foundation, there will be a link to a GoFundMe in the description of this video. Thank you once again for listening to this podcast.